Well, if you haven't heard already, we are a church that strives to follow God's mission of growing active followers of Jesus Christ and building his community. And one of the things that we've noticed over the last few months as leaders and as people praying and sharing with one another is that God is doing that mission in and through us and in Spokane through a journey, through a process. And we're calling that process Connect, Grow, and Love. As we've been sharing these stories, we find that the journey of knowing Jesus, the journey of discipleship that many of us are on, fit into a journey that we can identify in that way. Because we connect with one another, we grow closer to Jesus Christ, and then we are released to love others. That's the journey of connecting, growing, and loving. And as a church, we've been looking at that. We've been seeing God do that in the lives of people, and we want to join God in that. And so we've taken some significant steps recently to try to do that, to join God more and more in that journey of connecting, growing, and loving. Many of you know about some of those steps that we've taken recently, but what's cool about that is that journey of connecting, growing, and loving is not only something that we see God doing in our congregation, it's not only something that we see God doing in our community, but we also see Jesus leading that process in the Gospel of Luke as well. And so we're looking at just 6 chapters in the Gospel of Luke chapters 5 to 10. This is when Jesus has begun his ministry, and that's how he does it. He starts by calling people, disciples, to himself. He's connecting with people, and by connecting, we're talking about building relationships. Jesus is knowing people and getting to know them. We see people in Luke 5 to 10, we see them then growing closer and closer in their knowledge of God, in their love for Jesus. We see that growth happen. And then we see Jesus release them to go love. He sends out 70 believers to do it. He sends out 12 believers to do it. And he tells them to go and show the love of Jesus to the world. Connect, grow, and love. We started a special sermon series 2 weeks ago, though, where we are just focusing on one aspect of that journey. Because we feel like God, what we see happening in the life of this congregation, that we're really good at growing, we're really good at loving, but we want to work a bit harder as a church on connecting, on building new relationships with people, on growing closer to one another, but also making new connections with the world around us. And so today, in the Gospel of Luke, we're going to look at a passage where we see how incredibly powerful those simple relationships, those simple connections can be. We're going to look at Luke chapter 9 and at the Transfiguration, where Jesus goes with a few of his believers and he reveals himself in a powerful way. But what they discover there is they have this connection with Jesus. They go up on a mountain with him, and this event happens that we'll read about in a moment. And what they discover is that their connection with one another, their connection with Jesus, is actually going somewhere. That there is a destination to a connection, to a relationship with one another and with Jesus. They get a course set as they gather together, and it makes it's so clear to us this morning how absolutely incredible the connections we have with people and the connections we have with Jesus Christ can be. And so hear the word of God from the Gospel of Luke, beginning at chapter 9, beginning at verse 28. You can follow along on the screen. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly, they saw 2 men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent in all those days, told no one any of the things they had seen. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. My mom had foot surgery not too long ago, so I've been driving her around because she can't drive. She's got this surgical boot on her foot. And now she's healed from that. I've been taking her to her follow-up appointments and other medical appointments that she has for other things. And now she has to have the same surgery on the other foot. That's how it works. And so we're going to go through all of that all over again. So I've spent a lot of time driving my mom around, and I don't usually do that. She can drive herself. But and this is how it goes every time. I go and I pick her up. I help her because she's got her boot on and all this stuff. I help her come around to the other side of the car. I get her into that side of the car, and then I walk around and I sit down on the driver's side of the car. And just as I sit down, I say, "Okay, Google, navigate me to," and then wherever the doctor's appointment or hospital that we're going to. That's what I start to say, but I never get that far. I say, "Okay, Google, navigate me to," because I'm setting that destination to go to that doctor's appointment. And my mom, who might be here, I won't embarrass you if you are, but I haven't seen her yet this morning. My mom interrupts me every time. Every time she won't let me finish telling my phone where the destination is because she starts telling me how to get there. She'll say, "Oh, I like to go this way and turn there, and you don't want to go around the other, you don't want to go around the Avista building, you want to go this direction because this place, And I'll say, "Mom, Google knows all of this. Google has traffic directions, all of those kinds of things, and it's very difficult to get the destination set. And then as we're driving along, she'll keep telling me to turn here or turn there, and it's just been like that time after time. Well, the last time we drove somewhere, she started to speak up, and then she caught herself and she stopped and she said, "Oh, you have your phone." And since then, we have had the best conversations in the car. Because no longer does she have to keep stopping whatever conversation we're having to tell me, "Oh, I like to turn there," or all that kind of thing. We just let the phone take care of it. The destination gets set. And because the destination is set and we're on our way and we don't have to worry about where we're going as much as normal, we've ended up having these great conversations. We connect more because the destination is set. Jesus has this connection, this relationship with Peter, James, and John. And they walk up to the mountain together, and they're going up there to pray together. And as they're praying, they see Jesus changed. And they experience this event that we call the Transfiguration. And as they do that, they begin to understand something that they didn't understand before. They begin to understand that their connection with each other, their connection with Jesus, is going somewhere. It has a destination. It's not a stagnant connection. It's a connection that moves and grows and becomes better and even more enjoyable and more amazing because they know that destination is set. Now, we'll discover what that destination is in a moment, but one of the things that's interesting that we notice right away is that Jesus, as he walks up to the mountain, is walking up to the mountain with a small group connection. Jesus has a lot of connections in his life. He has reached out to the general public in many ways. He has tons of disciples who follow him. He has 12 disciples who follow him very closely. And even within the 12, he has another group, another kind of inner circle of disciples that he is particularly close to: Peter, James, and John. And so he calls these people that he's so deeply connected with, and they walk up to the mountain. And Luke, as he writes about this, tells us that they are going up to the mountain to pray together. It's a very typical small group activity. They go up together, and as they're praying, as they're experiencing this small group connection with one another, Jesus' face changes, his clothes change, these two men appear by him, all of these amazing things happen, and Peter, James, and John experience something that they never expected. Think about in your life what kinds of small group experiences that you've had, what kind of small group connections that you've had. I've been in a lot of small groups over the course of my life. I remember one in particular was a group of friends that were in the Fresno area when I was living down there, and we met for years together and read books together and prayed for one another. And during that time, one of the guys in this group, it was revealed that he had a pretty serious gambling addiction, and it was really damaging his marriage, and we tried to walk through that with him. There's a group that I've been a part of up here with other pastors in it, and we've tried to encourage each other during sometimes difficult leadership decisions to make in churches, and we've prayed for each other and helped one another. I've been part of a group of people. This is kind of an unusual group. It's a very unusual group, but we began going to a summer camp together when we were teenagers, and then later served in ministry together at this camp. And we've been meeting as a group of pastors and couples to support and encourage one another now for 35 years. We do this once a year, and it's been this amazing process. Think about some of the small groups around here, some of the ministries that we do. I'm sure many of you are familiar that churches often have what we like to call small group programs. And those programs can be great, and sometimes they're not so great, but the potential to have a great small group connection with someone, to actually build community with someone is absolutely there when you become part of a small group at a church. I've seen groups at churches do some really amazing and also some pretty difficult things. One group I remember had, there were about 10 or 12 people in the group, and in the course of about 2 months, 4 of the women, these adults in this group, were baptized because they had never known Jesus Christ before and came to faith through this amazing small group experience that they had. I know another group that as they were meeting and doing life together, one couple was going through a divorce, and this group just circled around them, and actually the couple stayed together partially because of the support of this group. And that was so many years ago, and that couple still has a good, solid marriage today, partly because of the intervention of this small group. I've seen small groups come around people who, one in particular who was experiencing spousal abuse, and intervening there and making sure that situation did not continue. Groups do amazing things. I'm sure you can think about some of the group experiences you've had. Maybe you've had a good, positive group experience like that, or maybe you haven't. Maybe what you've experienced in a small group has been awkward or uncomfortable. I think small group gatherings are more comfortable for some people than for others. But what we learn when Jesus takes his small group up to the mountain is that there's one thing that makes a difference. There's one thing that makes a small group effective in building community, in drawing people closer to Jesus. There's one thing that makes a small group enjoyable on the way, and that is when the group knows that it's not a stagnant group, it's not a stagnant connection, it's a connection that is moving, that is going somewhere, because Jesus journeys up to this mountain with this small group, and he reveals to them something so amazing that it transforms not only the nature of their connection, but actually their whole spiritual lives. It's an amazing moment when the destination is set. If you've been part of a group that hasn't worked, look back on that and think, what would it have been like if that group had the same destination that Jesus' group has? What is that destination? Well, they go up on the mountain, and they're watching this event take place. Jesus, like I said, his face has changed, and his clothes have changed, and he's dazzling white, and all of a sudden we have Moses there, and we have Elijah there, and we wonder as we're reading this, why are Moses and Elijah there? Bible scholars love to talk about that. They have all kinds of ideas about why is it Moses and why is it Elijah. Some will say, oh, it's Elijah because Elijah didn't die. You know, Elijah was taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot with fiery horses, and so that's why he's there. The problem with that is that's not the case for Moses. Moses died on a mountain. He was 120 years old, saw the promised land but didn't go in it. That doesn't really hold up. Other scholars will say, well, Moses, he represents the law, and Elijah represents the prophets. You know, these two kind of pillars, I guess, of Judaism. But the problem with that is Elijah isn't usually the prophet that's chosen to represent the other prophets. Now, Elijah, he's a great prophet, but he's not one of the big writing prophets. But when we step back and we read their experience and the sequence of events, the answer is so much more simple, I think. They come, they see Jesus revealed, Moses and Elijah are there, and they start talking about something in particular. And as they're doing that, we realize there is a timeline here. There is a movement here. There is a journey here. We have Moses, who's followed by Elijah, who's followed by something even better. It's Jesus. That timeline, that movement gets revealed to Jesus' small group right there in that moment. There is a purpose to this connection, to all of these connections that Jesus is making. Because we get to hear what Moses and Elijah and Jesus are talking about. They're talking about Jesus' departure. That Jesus is going to go and accomplish something. He's going to go do something in Jerusalem. That's what they're talking about. And the word that Luke even uses for departure, it's the same word for death or exiting or leaving. That word is exodon, Exodus. Just like Moses, who takes the Israelites out in the Exodus and brings them to safety, now Jesus is going to have an exodus of his own. He is going to Jerusalem, and he is going there to die. And just before this text, and the text starts, it says 8 days later, so we know it's connected. This event happens, and then 8 days later, this is what happens. 8 days before this event, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's telling them all these things that are going to happen. That he has to go to Jerusalem, that he is going to suffer, that he's going to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests, that he is going to be strung up on a cross, that he is going to be killed, and that he is then going to be raised from the dead. He's just told them all of that, and then he goes, has this moment on the mountain, Moses and Elijah, and that's what they're talking about, exactly. That's the destination. The destination is Jerusalem and what is going to happen there. And so Peter hears this, and they're all Peter, James, and John, I'm sure, are just overwhelmed by this. They don't know what to make of it. And Peter sees this, and Peter has this moment where he wants to build 3 dwellings. One for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for Jesus. Now, we could say a lot about those dwellings, but suffice it to say, Peter just wants to keep them there. Peter doesn't want this moment to end. Peter doesn't want that movement to happen. They're talking about, hey, we're going, this connection has a destination, but Peter says, no, I'm going to keep you right here. I want to live right here in this moment. I don't want to move on, and I want to build these dwellings so that you can stay. He wants to freeze this journey that they're on. But Luke says, and I love this, Luke says that Peter doesn't know what he's talking about. That's basically what Luke says. Peter is so overwhelmed, we can just picture his mind just being blown by what is happening. He doesn't quite get it. He doesn't know how to respond, but he wants to freeze the movement, and that's when God intervenes. Because this movement, this destination that these connections are leading to, it's not going to get stopped. It's going to move on. There aren't going to be dwellings built. There's not going to be anything frozen. A cloud comes, descends upon the mountain, and the voice of God speaks and says, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." It's like setting that destination. They're not worried about the streets of Spokane like my mom and I are worried about, but that once that destination is set, everything changes. the nature of the connection changes and things move forward. The word for choice is ekleilogmenos in Greek. And that choice, it's a choice with a purpose. A choice, like I've been saying, with a destination. And that destination is Jesus and what's happening in Jerusalem. Now think about, again, all the connections that you have in your life. Sure, think about your small group connections. I think that's very appropriate given the text. But this is true for all of our connections. Think about your family connections, your friendships, your neighbors, the people that you work with from day to day, the people maybe that live around you if you're in a retirement community or you're living in a college dorm. Or think about all of these connections that you have and ask yourself, what would change? How would that connection with that person or that group be different if you set the destination for that relationship as the gospel? If you set the destination for God's plan of grace in Jesus Christ, how would that relationship be different? How would you be different as a result of that relationship? And how much more meaning would that connection take on because, in fact, you set that destination? A while ago, I was at, not Riverfront Park, but the mall. What's that called? River Park Square? Is that what it's called? I was there walking along inside, and this young guy came up to me. He's probably 20, 22 maybe. Comes up, and he had someone with him, but she didn't say a word, and he has a Bible with him. And he came up to me, and he asked me if I could understand a Bible verse, if I could explain a Bible verse to him. And I figured out later this was his approach to kind of approach. This was this kind of pattern he had. He would go and ask all these people this question. And it was a verse I remember either in Genesis 1 or 5 because a very similar verse occurs in both places. And it's this verse that talks about how we're all created in the image of God. And then there's this little subtext that says, male and female, he created them both. God created them both. And as I talked to this young man trying to interpret this verse, supposedly, I learned this story that was pretty sad. He was actually part of a cult. This is a thing going on in Spokane right now, apparently. And they interpret this verse to mean that God created everybody in the image of God, and male and female, he created them both. And they interpret that to mean then that there must be two gods, literally. There is a male God and a female God. And so we're having this connection that's not like any connection I'm used to having. And we're talking about this verse, and I was trying to explain things. When you read the Bible, you really have to take into account what the author originally intended and how people would receive the text that the original people that it was addressed to. And I can assure you, at no point in Judaism did anyone ever think there were two gods, male and female. Kind of a reason there. And that didn't work. And so then I started talking to him, it's really in Hebrew, it's the same thing. When you say something twice for emphasis, like God created them in his image, male and female, he created them all. It's just saying the same thing twice, and that didn't work. So I'm trying theology or having this complicated, nothing was working. It was an interesting conversation at least. And then as we were talking, I got to know him a little bit. And I asked where he was from and things like that. And at one point in our conversation, I asked, and I don't know what made me ask this, but I said, hey, are you in touch with your family? And immediately the whole conversation changed. His demeanor changed. He just had this look of mourning and grief in his eyes, and he could not get away from me fast enough. Now, I don't know if that's because he was longing for relationship with his family, if maybe his family had a bad relationship and he had to leave, or if he left maybe because of this cult. I have no idea. But the moment we started talking about connection, the moment we started talking about relationship, it made a complete change in that kid's demeanor and experience. And that's because even though we were talking theology, even though we were talking reason, there is nothing more spiritually formative in our lives than our connections, than our relationships. And imagine how different and amazing your connections can be, all of ours, if we set the destination for that connection to be the grace of Jesus Christ, the grace that is only found in Jesus Christ. When that's what connections are for, they can be completely transformative. So think about, what is a connection in your life that you could do that with right now? It's probably, I'm just going to go out on a limb here, it's probably a small group experience. Did I just turn off my microphone? No, good. I thought I did. It's probably a small group experience, because that is something that not many of us have. That to have community, we might have family, we might have some friends, but to have a community that is intentionally setting a direction for grace in Christ, that can be a powerful thing. Now, on October 1st, I think that's Tuesday night, we're having just a small group. Heather Notsky's is revitalizing our small group ministries right now. She wants to invite anyone who's interested in just finding out more about making those small group kinds of connections. It's just a one-time thing. Come on Tuesday night to find out about that. You can read about that in the bulletin. That's important to do. Whatever connections you're thinking about, set that destination for Jesus Christ. And we do that by listening to Jesus Christ. That's what the voice of God says. This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him.